October 14th, 1977. A police officer sits alone on a dark country road, his radio barely working. Then it crackles to life, a voice desperate, calling for help. But here's what makes your skin crawl. The voice belonged to someone who'd been dead for 3 days. You lived through an era when things like this happened and no one could explain them. Tonight, we're going back to that autumn night, to Officer Robert Halloway, to words that should never have been heard, and to a mystery that still has no answer. Robert Halloway was 32 years old in 1977. He'd been with the Montana Highway Patrol for 7 years, long enough to know the difference between routine and wrong. That October night started like any other. He was stationed along Route 89, a lonely stretch between Great Falls and Choteau. The kind of road where you could drive for 20 minutes and not see another soul. Robert didn't mind the quiet. It gave him time to think. His radio sat on the seat beside him, an old Motorola unit that crackled with static more often than voices. The department knew it was unreliable. They'd promised him a new one for months, but budgets were tight, so Robert made do. He didn't know that faulty radio was about to change everything. Around 9:47 p.m., the radio hissed. Robert reached over and adjusted the dial, expecting the usual dispatch chatter. Instead, he heard breathing. Slow. Labored. Then a voice broke through. Male, strained, barely audible. Unit 7. This is Unit 12. Need assistance. Robert grabbed the handset. Unit 12? This is Unit 7. What's your location? Silence. Then that voice again, weaker this time. Route 89. Mile marker, 41. Robert's heart kicked. Mile marker 41 was less than 10 minutes south of his position. He threw the car into gear and radioed dispatch. But here's where it gets strange. Dispatch had no record of a Unit 12 on duty that night. In fact, they told Robert something that made his hands tighten on the wheel. Unit 7, there is no Unit 12, the dispatcher said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Robert stared at the radio. I just heard him. He's asking for help at mile marker 41. A pause. Then, Robert, Unit 12 was decommissioned. Officer Daniel Kress. He died 3 days ago. Robert's stomach dropped. Daniel Kress. He knew the name. Everyone did. Kress had been a veteran officer, 23 years on the force. 3 days earlier, he'd been found dead in his patrol car on a service road off Route 89. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. Robert had attended the memorial service that very afternoon, and now something, was using Kress's call sign. Robert's mind raced, but his training kicked in. He pressed the accelerator and headed south. The road was empty. No headlights, no taillights. Just the yellow line cutting through the dark. Robert's high beam swept over asphalt and scrub brush. His radio stayed silent now, just static, hissing like breath. He checked his speedometer, 70 miles per hour. Faster than he should have been going, but something told him speed mattered. Mile marker 39 passed, then 40. His pulse hammered in his ears, and then he saw it. Mile marker 41. Robert slowed and pulled onto the shoulder. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the car. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of sagebrush. He scanned the area. Nothing. No car. No one. Just empty road stretching into black. But then his flashlight caught something. Tire tracks. Fresh ones, veering off the road and into the dirt. Robert followed them with his light. They led toward a shallow gully about 50 yards from the highway. He radioed dispatch. Unit 7, I'm at mile marker 41. I've got tire tracks leading off-road. Investigating now. Dispatch responded immediately. Copy. Unit 7. Proceed with caution. Robert walked slowly, his boots crunching gravel. The tracks were deep, like someone had been driving fast and lost control, or like someone had been trying to get away from the road. He reached the edge of the gully and aimed his flashlight down. What he saw stopped him cold. A patrol car, nose down in the dirt. Roof lights shattered, doors closed, and painted on the side, barely visible under dust and damage, Unit 12. Robert's breath caught. This was Daniel Kress's car, the same one they'd found him in 3 days ago, the same one that should have been in the impound lot, back in Great Falls. So what was it doing here? Robert moved closer, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. The driver's side window was cracked, spiderwebbed from impact. He shone the light inside. The seat was empty, no body, no blood, just an old thermos on the floor and a clipboard with paperwork still clipped to it. The radio unit was smashed, its face cracked and wires hanging loose. Robert's mind spun. If the radio was destroyed, how had he heard that transmission? And if this car had been impounded, who drove it here? Then his radio crackled again. Unit 7. The voice. That same strained, desperate voice. Robert spun around, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Unit 12, identify yourself, he said into the handset. Static. Then, can't hold on much longer. Robert's skin prickled. Where are you? I'm at your vehicle. There's no one here. A long pause. Wind moved through the gully, rustling dry brush. Then the voice came back, clearer now, almost too clear. You shouldn't have come, Robert. His name? The voice knew his name. Robert's throat tightened. Who is this? Silence. Then, softly, almost a whisper. Check the trunk. The line went dead. Robert stood frozen, staring at the patrol car below. Check the trunk. Every instinct told him to wait for backup, but something stronger pulled him forward. Robert climbed down into the gully. Loose rocks skittered under his boots. The air felt heavier here, like the darkness had weight. He reached the car and moved to the rear. The trunk was dented, the lock mechanism damaged. He tried the latch. It didn't budge. He pulled harder. Still nothing. Then, with a metallic groan, it popped open. Robert aimed his flashlight inside. The trunk was empty, completely empty. No spare tire, no emergency kit, just bare metal and a few dried leaves. Relief washed over him, and then confusion. Why would the voice tell him to check an empty trunk? He was about to close it when he noticed something. Scratches, deep gouges on the inside of the trunk lid, like someone had clawed at it. From the inside, Robert's hand trembled. He ran his fingers over the scratches. They were fresh. Metal shavings still clung to the grooves. His mind raced. Daniel Kress died of a heart attack. That's what the coroner said. That's what everyone believed. But these marks told a different story. A story of someone trapped, someone desperate, someone trying to get out. Robert backed away from the car. His radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't a voice. It was a sound, a rhythmic thumping, slow, deliberate, like something heavy hitting metal. Thump, thump, thump. It came from the radio speaker, but it sounded wrong, too real, too close. Robert looked around. The gully was still, no movement, no wind. But the thumping continued, and then it stopped. Silence pressed in. Then the voice returned. He locked me in, Robert. The words were clear, no static, no distortion. Who locked you in? Robert asked, his voice barely steady. He said it was for my own good. Said I knew too much. Robert's heart pounded. Who? Who did this to you? A pause. Then, you know who. Robert's mind raced through names, faces, incidents, but nothing made sense. I don't understand, he said. The voice came back, colder now. Check the glove box. You'll understand. Robert looked at the car, the glove box. He moved to the passenger side, pulled the door handle. It was unlocked. The door creaked open, and the interior light flickered weakly. Robert leaned in and popped the glove box. Papers spilled out. Registration, insurance, and then something else. A small cassette tape. No label, just black plastic. Robert picked up the tape. It was warm, like it had been in someone's hand recently. He turned it over. Nothing written on it. No markings, but it was clearly important. Why else would it be here? He pocketed the tape and stepped back from the car. His radio hissed again, but no voice came, just static. Robert climbed out of the gully and returned to his patrol car. He sat in the driver's seat and stared at the tape. Part of him didn't want to know what was on it, but a bigger part knew he had no choice. He pulled out his portable cassette player, a small unit he kept for recording witness statements, and slid the tape in. He pressed play. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a voice. Not Cress's voice. Someone else's. "This is Sheriff Thomas Bridger." Date: October 10th, 1977. This recording is for internal use only. Robert's blood went cold. Sheriff Bridger, his superior, the man who ran the entire Montana Highway Patrol Division. The tape continued. Officer Daniel Cress has made allegations regarding irregularities in evidence handling. Specifically, he claims that confiscated funds from the Billings raid were never logged. He's threatening to file a formal complaint. Robert's hands tightened on the wheel. The Billings raid had been a major drug bust 6 months ago. Over $200,000 in cash seized. It made headlines. But Cress thought something was wrong with the money? The tape crackled. Bridger's voice returned, quieter now. "I've tried reasoning with him, but Cress won't let it go. I have no choice." A pause. Then, chillingly, "He'll be dealt with." Robert stopped the tape. His mind reeled. Dealt with. What did that mean? And why was this tape in Cress's car? He rewound and played it again, listening for anything he might have missed. The recording ended abruptly, mid-sentence, like it had been cut off, or like someone had stopped it on purpose. Robert sat in silence. If Bridger had threatened Cress, and Cress died 3 days later? Number. It couldn't be. Heart attack. The coroner confirmed it. But those scratches in the trunk, that desperate voice on the radio, the pieces didn't fit, unless someone wanted it to look like a heart attack. Robert's stomach twisted. He looked at the radio. Should he report this? Who would he even report it to? Bridger controlled the department. If Robert said anything, he'd be next. The radio crackled. "Robert?" That voice again. Cress's voice. "You found the tape?" "Yes," Robert said quietly. "What do I do with it?" Silence stretched. Then, "You do what I couldn't. You finish this." Robert's throat tightened. "How?" "If I go to Bridger, I'm dead." "Not Bridger," the voice said. "FBI. There's a field office in Helena. Agent named Sarah Kellerman. She's investigating the Billings raid. Give her the tape." Robert wrote the name down on his notepad. Sarah Kellerman. "Why didn't you go to her?" Robert asked. The voice came back, sad and hollow. "I tried, but I didn't make it." Robert's chest ached. "What happened to you, Daniel?" A long pause. Wind whistled outside the car, then softly, "I trusted the wrong person." The line went dead. Robert sat there gripping the handset. The night felt heavier now, more dangerous. He looked at the tape on the seat beside him. This small piece of plastic was a death sentence. If anyone knew he had it, he wouldn't last the night. But if he didn't do something, Cress's death would mean nothing. And whoever killed him would get away with it. Robert started the engine. He had a decision to make. Drive back to the station and pretend this never happened, or take the tape to Helena and risk everything. He thought about Cress, about the desperation in that voice, about those scratches in the trunk. Someone had trapped him. Someone had let him die, and then covered it up. Robert put the car in gear and turned north, toward Helena. The drive took 4 hours. Robert kept his eyes on the rearview mirror the whole way. Every set of headlights made his pulse spike. Every truck that passed made him wonder if someone was following him. He kept the tape in his jacket pocket, close to his chest. The roads were empty at this hour, just long stretches of darkness and the occasional gas station glow. Robert didn't stop, didn't call anyone. He just drove. By the time he reached Helena, the sky was starting to lighten. The FBI field office was a plain brick building on the east side of town. Robert parked across the street and sat for a moment. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of what he was about to do. He pulled the tape from his pocket and stared at it. Inside the building, a receptionist looked up as Robert approached. "I need to speak with Agent Sarah Kellerman," he said. The The receptionist frowned. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent. It's about the Billings raid." Her expression changed. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly. A minute later, a woman appeared from a back hallway, mid-30s, sharp eyes, dark suit. "I'm Agent Kellerman," she said. "You have information about Billings?" Robert nodded. "Somewhere private." She led him to a small interrogation room. White walls, metal table, 2 chairs. Robert sat down and placed the tape on the table. Kellerman looked at it. "What is this?" "A confession," Robert said, "from Sheriff Thomas Bridger. About missing funds and about Officer Daniel Kress." Kellerman's face hardened. "Play it." Robert played the tape. Kellerman listened without moving. Her expression stayed neutral, but her fingers drummed lightly on the table. When the tape ended, she sat back. "Where did you get this?" "Kress's patrol car, the one he died in." "And you're saying Bridger killed him?" Kellerman asked. "I'm saying Kress believed Bridger was stealing evidence money. And 3 days after making these allegations, Kress died of a supposed heart attack. But I found scratches inside his trunk, like someone had been locked in there." Kellerman studied him. "You understand what you're accusing a sitting sheriff of?" "Yes," Robert said, "but I also know what I heard and what I saw." Kellerman stood. "Wait here." She took the tape and left the room. Robert sat alone. Minutes ticked by. Then an hour. He wondered if he'd made a mistake. When Kellerman returned, she wasn't alone. 2 other agents followed her in. "We're opening an investigation," she said, "based on this tape and your statement, but I need you to understand something. If Bridger finds out you came here, you're in danger." Robert nodded. "I know. We'll need you to go back to work. Act normal. Don't tell anyone what you found." "For how long?" Robert asked. "As long as it takes," Kellerman said. "We'll be watching Bridger. Gathering evidence. When we have enough, we'll move." Robert swallowed hard. "And if he figures it out before then?" Kellerman's expression softened. "Then you call me immediately, day or night." She handed him a card with a phone number written on the back. Robert pocketed it. He stood to leave, but Kellerman stopped him. "One more thing. That voice you heard on the radio. You really think it was Kress?" Robert hesitated. It was a question he'd been avoiding, because the answer didn't make sense. "I don't know what it was," he said finally, "but it led me to the tape. It told me to check the trunk. It gave me your name." Kellerman nodded slowly. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks when we're under stress." "Maybe," Robert said, "but those scratches in the trunk were real. The tape was real. Whatever that voice was, it wanted the truth to come out." Kellerman didn't argue. She just watched him leave. Robert drove back to Great Falls in silence. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the highway. He felt hollow, exhausted, but also strangely calm. He'd done what Kress couldn't. He'd passed the truth to someone who could act on it. Now all he could do was wait. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Robert's life. He went to work every day, responded to calls, wrote reports, and tried to act like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He couldn't look at Sheriff Bridger without thinking about that tape. About Kress locked in a trunk. About a voice on a broken radio that shouldn't have been possible. Bridger seemed normal, friendly even. He asked Robert how he was holding up after Kress's death, offered condolences, talked about department morale. Robert smiled and nodded and said all the right things. But inside, he was screaming, because he knew. He knew what Bridger had done, and he knew Bridger had no idea anyone suspected him. It was a dangerous game. One wrong word, one suspicious glance, and Robert would end up like Kress. Then, on November 2nd, everything broke open. Robert was on patrol when his radio crackled. "All units, report to headquarters immediately. Code Black." Code Black meant officer down. Robert's heart dropped. He raced back to the station. When he arrived, agents were everywhere, FBI windbreakers, cars blocking the entrance, and Sheriff Thomas Bridger in handcuffs being led out of the building. Robert parked and watched. Bridger's face was red with anger. He shouted something at the agents, but Robert couldn't hear the words. Then Kellerman appeared. She saw Robert and walked over. "We got him," she said quietly. "The tape was enough to get a warrant. We searched his office, found ledgers, bank statements. He'd been skimming evidence money for 3 years, over $500,000. Robert's chest tightened. "And Kress?" Kellerman's face darkened. "We exhumed his body. The coroner missed it the first time, but the second autopsy found traces of a paralytic drug in his system. Not enough to kill him, but enough to incapacitate him. Bridger injected him, locked him in the trunk, and let him suffocate." Robert closed his eyes. The scratches, the desperation. Kress had been alive, aware, trapped, and no one heard him. "How did Bridger get away with it?" Robert asked. "He was the one who called in the body," Kellerman said. "He found Kress's car on that service road, made it look like Kress had pulled over and died naturally. The coroner was sloppy, didn't run a full talk screen. By the time anyone suspected foul play, Kress was already buried." Robert's hands clenched. "So that voice, it really was him?" Kellerman gave him a strange look. "What do you mean?" Robert shook his head. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud." But it wasn't nothing. Robert knew what he'd heard, what he'd experienced. That voice had led him to the truth, had guided him step by step, told him where to look, who to trust. It wasn't stress. It wasn't his imagination. It was Daniel Kress. Somehow, from wherever the dead go. Kress had reached out one last time, not for revenge, not for closure, but for justice. Robert never told Kellerman the full story. He didn't think she'd believe him. Hell, he barely believed it himself. But he kept that broken radio, took it home, put it on a shelf in his garage, and sometimes late at night he'd sit and stare at it, wondering if he'd hear that voice again. Bridger went to trial in the spring of 1978. The evidence was overwhelming. The tape, the ledgers, the autopsy results. He was convicted of murder, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice, sentenced to life without parole. The department was rocked. Investigations spread. 2 other officers were implicated in the scheme. Careers ended, reputations destroyed. Robert was cleared of any wrongdoing. In fact, he was commended, given a medal for bravery, promoted to sergeant. But none of it felt good, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw those scratches in the trunk, heard that desperate voice, and wondered how many other Daniels were out there, trapped, silenced, forgotten. He started keeping a journal, writing down details of every case, every call, every suspicion, because he'd learned something that October night. Sometimes the dead don't stay quiet. Years passed. Robert rose through the ranks, became a lieutenant, then captain. He never forgot Daniel Kress. Every October 14th he'd visit Kress's grave, lay flowers, stand there in silence, and thank him for trusting him, for fighting even after death, for refusing to let evil win. Other officers thought it was odd, but Robert didn't care. He knew the truth, and the truth was stranger than anyone could imagine. In 1985, a journalist from the Billings Gazette contacted Robert. She was writing a piece about the Bridger case, wanted to interview him. Robert agreed. They met at a diner in Great Falls. She asked the usual questions. "How did you find the tape?" "What made you go to the FBI?" Robert answered carefully. Left out the parts that couldn't be explained. But at the end, she asked one more question. "Do you believe in ghosts, Captain Halloway?" Robert paused, stirred his coffee. Thought about that night, about the voice, about the radio that shouldn't have worked, about words that came from a dead man's call sign. "I believe some people refuse to be silenced," he said finally, "even by death." The journalist wrote that down. The article ran a week later. It was good, detailed, fair, but it didn't capture the real story, because the real story couldn't be printed. It was too strange, too impossible. And yet it had happened. Robert knew it. Kress knew it. And somewhere in the space between this world and whatever comes next, the truth lived on. Robert retired in 1994, 17 years after that October night. He moved to a small cabin outside Choteau, close to where it all happened, close to Route 89. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Robert would drive that stretch of highway, past mile marker 41. Look out at the gully where Cress's car had been. It was empty now, no wreckage, no evidence, just dirt and brush and darkness. But the memory was there, burned into his mind, and sometimes, very rarely, his old radio, the one from 1977, would crackle, just static, no words, no voice. But Robert always listened, just in case, because if it happened once, it could happen again. And if the dead could reach out once, they could do it again. Robert never married, never had kids. He lived alone with his memories and his questions, and every October 14th, he'd sit on his porch, radio beside him, and he'd wait. For a voice, for a sign, for anything that might prove he hadn't imagined it all. In 2003, Robert was diagnosed with lung cancer, 60 years old. Doctors gave him 6 months. He took the news quietly, didn't fight it, didn't rage. He'd lived a good life, done what needed to be done, helped people, found justice for Daniel Cress. That was enough. As his health declined, he spent more time listening to that old radio, turning the dial, hearing nothing but static and distant voices from truckers and dispatchers. But he kept listening, kept hoping. And then, one night in late September, something happened. Robert was sitting on his porch. The sun had set. Stars were just beginning to show. The radio sat on the table beside him, powered on but quiet. He wasn't expecting anything, wasn't even really paying attention. But then it crackled, and a voice came through, clear, familiar, impossible. "Robert." He froze. His hand shook as he reached for the radio. "Daniel?" A pause. Then, "It's time, Robert." Robert's throat tightened. "Time for what?" "To rest," the voice said gently. "You did good. You finished it." Tears welled in Robert's eyes. "I never got to thank you for trusting me, for showing me the truth." "You don't need to thank me," the voice said. "You did what I couldn't. That's enough." Robert wiped his eyes. "What happens now?" "Now?" A soft chuckle. "Now you let go. Stop waiting. Stop listening. It's over." Robert looked at the radio, at the stars, at the dark highway beyond his cabin. "Will I see you again?" he asked. The voice came back, warm and kind. "Maybe, but not yet. You've got a little more time. Use it well." And then the radio went silent. Robert sat there for a long time. The night grew cold. The stars wheeled overhead. But he didn't move. He just breathed. Felt the weight lift from his chest. The burden he'd carried for 26 years. Gone. Released. The next morning, Robert packed up the radio, wrapped it carefully in cloth, drove to the Highway Patrol headquarters in Great Falls, asked to see the evidence room. The clerk was confused, but Robert insisted. He placed the radio on the counter. "This belonged to Officer Daniel Cress," he said. "I want it preserved. For the record." The clerk logged it, tagged it, filed it away. Robert walked out of the building feeling lighter than he had in decades. He went home, sat on his porch, watched the sunset, and smiled. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. Robert Halloway died on November 18, 2003, peacefully, in his sleep. The funeral was small, a few old colleagues, a couple of neighbors. The mayor of Choteau gave a brief speech about Robert's service and dedication, about how he'd brought down a corrupt sheriff and saved lives. But no one mentioned the radio, or the voice, or the impossible October night that started it all. Because those who knew the full story, Kellerman, maybe a few others, understood some things are better left unsaid. Some mysteries don't need solving, they just need remembering. Robert was buried next to Daniel Cress, in the Great Falls Cemetery, under a simple stone that read, Captain Robert Halloway, 1943 to 2003. He listened. And if you visit that cemetery today on October 14th, people say you can sometimes hear static, faint, distant, like a radio that's almost working. The radio, the one Robert turned in, sat in the evidence room for years, forgotten, collecting dust. Until 2018, a new clerk was digitizing old case files. She came across the Bridger case, read through the reports, saw the note about a radio logged in 2003. Curious, she pulled it from storage, unwrapped it. It was old, battered, the kind of unit they hadn't used in decades. She turned it on, not expecting anything, but it powered up, green light flickering, static hissing. She laughed. After all these years, it still worked. She set it on her desk and went back to her typing. And then, just for a moment, she heard something, a voice, low, indistinct. She couldn't make out words, but it sounded like a name, Robert. She turned, stared at the radio, but the static had returned, nothing more. She mentioned it to a coworker. He laughed it off. Old radios pick up all kinds of interference. CB channels, airplane chatter, nothing unusual. But she couldn't shake the feeling. She did some digging. Found out the radio had belonged to Captain Robert Halloway. Found out about the Bridger case, about Officer Daniel Kress, about the voice that led Robert to the truth. She wanted to know more, but the files were sealed. The people involved were dead. All she had were fragments, pieces of a story that didn't quite fit together. So she wrote it down, everything she'd found, put it in a folder, labeled it, the radio case, unexplained. And she filed it away, because some stories don't get neat endings. Some mysteries stay mysteries. And maybe that's how it should be. But here's the thing. The radio is still there, in that evidence room, still functional, still turned on. And every now and then, someone reports hearing something, a voice, a word, a whisper of static that sounds almost human. Maintenance workers, night security guards, even a visiting detective from another state. They all hear something. But when they try to record it, it disappears. When they try to investigate, there's nothing there. Just an old radio, sitting on a shelf, doing what radios do, picking up signals, broadcasting nothing. But those who hear it always describe the same feeling, a sense of urgency, of unfinished business, of someone trying to speak. And they always ask the same question. Who was Captain Halloway? And the answer is never enough. Because you can't explain Robert with facts and dates. You can't capture what he experienced with reports and evidence. You have to feel it. The fear of that October night, the weight of holding a truth that could get you killed, the impossibility of a voice from beyond, the courage it took to keep going, to trust what shouldn't be trusted, to listen when everyone else said it was impossible. Robert wasn't special. He was just a cop, doing his job, but he was willing to believe. And that belief changed everything. It saved Daniel Kress from being forgotten. It brought down a murderer. It proved that some truths can't be buried, even by death. And it left behind a legacy, a story, a warning, and a promise that justice matters, that voices deserve to be heard, even the ones that come through broken radios, even the ones that shouldn't exist. Robert heard, he listened, and he acted. That's all any of us can do. So what really happened that night? Was it Daniel Kress's ghost, a psychic echo, a dying man's final transmission caught in some loop of time and space? Or was it Robert's subconscious, his intuition, guiding him in a voice he could understand? We'll never know. And maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe the point isn't the explanation. Maybe the point is the outcome. A killer caught, a victim vindicated, a truth preserved. That's what matters. Not how it happened, but that it did. And if you're the kind of person who needs a rational answer, who can't accept the unexplained, then this story isn't for you. But if you've ever felt something you couldn't explain, heard something you shouldn't have heard, known something without knowing how you knew it, then you understand. Because the world is stranger than we admit. Daniel Kress died on October 11th, 1977, alone, trapped, suffocating in the trunk of his own patrol car. But 3 days later, his voice traveled across miles of Montana highway, through a broken radio, to the one person who could help him. And that voice didn't just speak. It guided, it revealed, it demanded justice. You can call it impossible. You can call it coincidence. You can explain it away with science and skepticism. But Robert Halloway heard it, felt it, followed it, and because he did, a murderer went to prison. A corrupt system was exposed, and a dead man's final act wasn't desperation. It was defiance. It was hope. It was proof that even in death, we are not powerless, that our voices matter, that the truth can't be silenced, not by fear, not by corruption, and not even by the grave. Route 89 is still there, winding through Montana, past mile marker 41, past the gully where Daniel Kress's car was found. And sometimes, late at night, when the highway is empty and the world is quiet, travelers report strange things. A crackle of static on their CB radios, a voice asking for help, a call sign that hasn't been used in decades. Unit 12. They pull over, look around, see nothing, drive on, and they tell themselves it was interference. A prank. Their imagination. But deep down, they wonder. Because some voices refuse to fade, some stories refuse to end. And on October 14th, 1977, one police officer with a broken radio heard something impossible, something that shouldn't have been real. But it was. And it changed everything. The question isn't whether you believe it. The question is, what would you do if you heard it too?